At the heart of the letter about endured suffering is submission. Is that a coincidence? Probably not. Submission is very hard. When we keep our eyes on the horizontal, when our eyes are fixed on earth. But as Peter is trying to tell us over and over again, if we lift our eyes above the trouble, above what's right in front of us with an eternal perspective, submission is very doable. In fact, it's a beautiful offering to the Lord if you lift your eyes up, you see. We are all subject to somebody. We all submit to somebody, and odds are there's somebody in your life that submits to you, right? A child, an employee, the neighbor kid, whoever it is, somebody submits to you. So this subject is for everybody, this idea of submission. Peter is going to give us 3 aspects of our lives where we are called to submit. There's more, but he's going to pull 3 different aspects of a believer's life where we are called to submit, and the why and the how to endure it. Okay? That's kind of what this text is, which is why it's all lumped together. 3 different ways. There's submission on the national level, submission on a vocational level, and a submission on a relational level. Those are the 3 examples that he gives us. And it kind of generally covers quite a bit of territory when those are your 3 things. So that's kind of our outline tonight, okay? The first way he calls us to submit is nationally. As the big picture, as a citizen of the land that you belong to, we are called to submit to the authorities of the land the Lord puts you in. Okay, 2 Peter, 1 Peter, chapter 2, verse 13. Look at this. It says, be subject or submitted, same word, for the Lord's sake. Whose sake? To every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as set by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. Some earth-shattering news for you. The world is getting worse. And it will only get worser, right? That's the order of things. The Bible promises that that's true. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And the only way it gets better is heaven. So it's going to get worse. Immoral leadership is a fact of life. Leadership that isn't following the Lord, it's a fact of life. They will call the shots. That's just true. Immoral leadership. Peter tells the church on the run to honor the emperor. Now, just to remind us of the audience, how would this hit the ear of the recipients of this letter? Peter saying, honor the emperor, the dispersed church. Because who is Peter talking about? Who is their emperor? Caesar Nero. That's bad, Caesar Nero. What, Pete? Yes, I'm telling you to honor the emperor, and he was an evil dude. Now, the thing is, with the Jews especially, evil leadership is not new to the nation of Israel. Caesar Nero is not the only evil guy they've ever had. They have had several. They have been found under evil rulership for millennia. Do you guys remember Egypt? How long were they there? 400 years. What about Babylon? Remember him? King Neb? Okay. What about all the kings in Kings and Chronicles? Do you remember them? In the north, they were only evil. Remember that? And horribly evil. People like Ahab and Jezebel. Remember that? Evil rulers. What about Herod, who was on the scene when Jesus was here? Do you remember what he did? He killed all the boys under 2, trying to snuff out this Messiah on the scene, you see. So it's not new. Nero is just the next guy in the lineup. Now, write this down. Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Paul says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. Subject or submitted. For there is no authority except from God. I'm going to say that again. There is no authority except from God. And those that exist have been instituted by God. That is a huge statement. Every person, Paul says, is called to be subject or submitted under the authorities that are in power, and the authorities that are in power were elected by God. There's no authority that's ever been in power in anywhere on the globe that did not first pass through the providential hand of the Lord. That should be comforting, actually. Why is that comforting? Because the Lord is sovereign over all, right? Which means some of the leaders, like Caesar Nero, were instituted by God, which Nero is the guy that also beheaded Paul. It is also who Paul is talking about, Caesar Nero. Submission to government and authorities is much easier to swallow when we remember that the Lord is the one who put them in the place in the first place, you see. It's not an accident. He's not reeling. He doesn't not know what to do. And think about the world globe right now and all the rulers that are in place. Some of them are pretty hard to swallow, right? There is no authority in power that God has not approved, good or bad. And Paul says in verse 4, they are always for our good. In God's sovereignty, he is moving the earth, the globe, down the blueprint of prophetic eschatology to get us to him, home, heaven. His goal is to get us to when the kingdom comes. And he's the one who knows how to get us there. And sometimes it's through the hand of evil rulers. For Israel especially, that has been the case 90% probably of the time. They were under evil rulership, but it was always for a reason and always for a purpose, and that purpose was always moving Israel down the timeline, down their blueprint to the next thing that the Lord has for them. It was the only way to do that. This subject is really hard. It's true. Nationally, you see, even Nero. Now, what's good about Caesar Nero? That's a tough one. Okay, if they're for our good and the Lord's doing something, somebody fill me in. Yeah.
Disperse the church.
Yes.
And made them stronger.
The gospel spread like wildfire under Caesar Nero because the Christians were mostly huddled around Jerusalem still. And do you remember the Great Commission? To spread the gospel in Judea, Jerusalem, and the globe. Well, so far, they were all huddled around the same area that they always were until Caesar, when the church dispersed. And the gospel spread out to the known world before Columbus. The known world, whatever they knew was the world, the gospel was spreading. And the church always grows under persecution. Always. And it did. These churches were popping up in homes and popping up in places that no one had ever been. And the church was growing and dispersing. So you could argue, not only was Caesar Nero good, but he was planned for the Great Commission. Evil? Yeah. But the Lord was doing something with the evil that was there, you see. Proverbs 21:1 says that the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wills. This is my favorite part. Listen to that again. The king's heart, the authority, the rulers, whoever's in charge, is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. And he turns it wherever he wills. So they may be the talking heads, but the Lord is the neck. And that's what Proverbs is saying. Ultimately, the sovereignty is in the hands of the Lord always. Daniel chapter 2, verse 21. Daniel says he changes times and he changes seasons. He removes kings and he sets kings up. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. The Lord is the one who changes the seasons. He sets kings up, he puts kings down in his sovereignty, in his providence, because he knows where he wants his people to end up and how to get us there. So he uses these people for his purpose. He doesn't condone the evil that's going on, but he's going to use it for the purpose to march us all ultimately to home. Anybody want to go home? Anybody want to go home? I'm kind of tapped out. I'm ready. Let's go. We all want to go. We all want to see Jesus rule and reign forever, where there's peace and tranquility, and the whole thing. We all want that, but nobody wants to get there. Well, we do, which means we can say yes and amen, and righteous and true are his judgments for whatever happens here in this nation and every other nation. The Lord has it. It's not going to mess him up. Russia doesn't mess him up. Iran doesn't mess him up. Israel doesn't mess him up. Ukraine doesn't mess him up. The United States does not mess him up. He knows what he's doing. Our job, though, is to submit to whoever it is, you see, on a national level. So, trust his sovereign hand, Peter says, even when Nero is the one on the throne. Man, that's a tough call. That's a hard assignment. We've never had a Nero. So if they can do it, we can do it. Caesar Nero, he knows how to navigate the immoral and the evil authority. He does it all the time. He knows how to do it. Be subject to them all, Peter says, every human institution as unto the Lord, who has eternal dominion and put them in authority in the first place. You don't trust the flesh and blood, you trust the eternal king behind the flesh and blood. That's what you do. No matter who it is, we will be absolutely miserable if we keep our eyes focused on the horizontal, looking at the one in charge. We will be discouraged. So Peter says, as he does with every subject, lift your eyes up. Don't look at the authority, the president, the king, the Nero in front of you. Look above him at the sovereign King of Kings. And then submit to me, you see. Don't do it for them. Do it for me. That's what the Lord says. Look at verse 15. For this is the will of God. Pause. Does anybody want to know what the will of God is? Well, here's some. This is the will of God. That what? That by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Remember, our context is ruling authorities, right? Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Our holy conduct, regardless of governments, reflects the gospel to those who are watching us. Just like everything else. It reflects our living hope, and it gives us an answer for the hope that's within us. Why aren't you freaking out? Why aren't you mad? Why aren't you in an upheaval about this leader, this government, or this president? Oh, because I serve the sovereign king who has a plan for what's going on in the nation that I belong to. And I have a living hope, you see. And you can point people to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Look at verse 17. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor what? The emperor. Honor the emperor. But what directive comes right before honor the emperor? Fear God. Fear God first. Then honor the emperor. Or in other words, keep your eyes on me, the Lord says, and you will be able to honor Caesar Nero. Keep your eyes on me and you'll be able to do it. Or in other words, you can't honor the emperor without fearing God first, without your eyes on me. Or in other words, fear God so that you can honor the emperor. Any way you say it, the point is, look at me and you will be able to do it. Submission will be doable because you're doing it for me. You're not looking at the flesh and blood. Your eyes are not horizontal. They are vertical, up. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the King of Kings. And in honoring him in this way, which is the will of the Lord, you will honor the emperor in front of you as a default, you see. And your witness will be strong. You will be a light and salt and hope, no matter what. You will be your own little torch bouncing around. We'll be sharing living hope and be like, why are you so okay right now? Like, do you see what's going on with America? They're like, yeah, but I have a living hope, you see. And I've got a King Jesus. That's what he's saying. Our passport is from a different kingdom. So while we're here, Peter says, fear the Lord, honor the authorities the Lord has put in place by his sovereignty, and keep your eyes fixed on the kingdom shore where we belong. And that's how you do it. So Peter says, submit and endure it. Why? Because it is the will of God. How? Fear the Lord first. Do it for him. Nationally, why do we have to do it? It is the will of God. How do you do it? You fear the Lord first. You keep your eyes on him and you do it for him. That's how you do it. That's how you get through it. And now submission is doable, you see, and a beautiful offering to the Lord, no matter what. Okay, so nationally, that's where Peter lands. But also vocationally, we are called as believers to submit to the authorities over the work that the Lord has called you to do. The authorities over the work that the Lord has called you to do, whatever that is. Look at verse 18. Servants, Be subject or submitted to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle bosses, but also to the unjust. So first you have evil authorities, and now you have unjust bosses. Right? Unjust bosses. That's true. That's what he's talking about. For this is a gracious thing. Mark this. When, mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. Okay, let's talk about this. Peter is talking about unjust suffering. What's unjust suffering? Suffering when it is not fair. It's unjust, right? Even in the best circumstances that we have, we will get weary and discouraged if we keep our eyes focused on the authority in front of us when we are at work, doing what the Lord called us to do. Whoever is in authority over us, even in the best of circumstances, we're all fallible and flawed, and it can get weary, even in the best cases. This boss that Peter's talking about is just wholly unfair, you see. Especially if the trial we are enduring is because of the authority in front of us. I am in a trial and you're the reason. That's what Paul's talking about. Peter. Okay, so how do we endure it? Same way. Lift your eyes up, higher, right? Take your eyes off the immediate person in front. It's all the same. Off the immediate person in front of you, look over that person's shoulder and submit to the Lord, who put that person in front of you in authority over you. You skip them completely. You look right over their shoulder and look at Jesus. Do it for Jesus. This is simple math. This all boils down to like a few sentences. When mindful of God, or in other words, fixing our eyes on Jesus, one graciously endures unjust suffering. Unjust. Jesus says, do it for me, and by default, you will honor the person I have put in front of you. Honor me, and in honoring me, you will honor them. You don't even have to do it for them. Do it for Jesus. This is the math. Suffering on earth while fixing our eyes on Jesus. Our subject is submission. It's all the same. It's all the same thing. So I triumph over the one in front of me when I look over their shoulder and do it for the Lord, even when the workplace is unjust, even if your bosses are unjust, even if they are causing you unjust suffering. I'm not looking at them anyway. I'm doing it for the Lord, knowing that this is the rock quarry. Remember that? And the Lord has placed this person in an authority in my life, probably for my good, because it is the exact chisel to shape me and mold me into the image of Jesus. That's what he's talking about. You do it for him, and you trust the person in front of you into the Lord's hand to deal with them. That's what you do. Now, Colossians chapter 3, go there with me. We're gonna look at this. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, how much is that? All. Whatever you do. Okay, this is the directive. Whatever you do, work heartily. Work heartily means effort. Some elbow grease, right? Whatever you're doing, you put your whole heart into it. You work heartily. You give it 110%. As for the Lord and not for men, the flesh and blood, the person in front of you, whatever you're doing, whatever the Lord has put in your hand to do, no matter what it is, no matter what that work is, you do it with everything you've got, because that's what the Lord wants you to do. Not for the person in front of you. Do it for the Lord. Do it for the Lord. Knowing, okay, this is the reason. We like reasons because they don't really stick really good if we don't know why we have to do them. At least me, I was like, that's cool. Why? Tell me why or I'm not going to do it because I'm stubborn. Knowing, he says, that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance. Does that sound familiar? It's the same inheritance we talked about in 1 Peter chapter 1, the imperishable inheritance, right? As your reward. Listen, you are going to, whatever the Lord has you do, whoever your boss is, it doesn't matter. Whatever the Lord is calling you to do, whatever authority is telling you to do something, you do it with everything you've got. You give it all you have. Not for them. Do it for the Lord, knowing that there is a reward for it if you do it for Jesus. Now it's worth something, right? It's not just a chore now or some lame thing that somebody told me to do. It's not that. It can be hay and stubble with a bad attitude. But the Lord's like, whatever you do, no matter who told you to do it, no matter how stupid you think it is, you do it with all your heart, you give it everything you've got, you do it for me, and I'll reward you for it at the end. Oh, I'll sweep, I'll do it, I'll mop, I'll clean the toilet. Who is now raising their hand? I am, because it's not for them. He can be a complete jerk. And I've cleaned this bathroom 18 times and nobody else has had to do it. Now all of a sudden, it's gold, it's kingdom, it's eternal, it's a reward. What? Sign me up. See how an eternal perspective changes toilet cleaning? Instead of grumbling and complaining because it's unfair, because I'm the only one that has to do it, and all this grumbling, you'll still have to clean the toilet and it'll be wood, hay, and stubble. Or you can do it for the Lord, and now handing a glass of water to a little kid is eternal. And you get to reap the reward of it forever. The same crummy job. Now submission is bearable. What changed? The boss? The chore? What changed? You've lifted your eyes off earth and you're looking at King Jesus. And you do it for him. That's the only difference. You remember, Paul says, you are serving the Lord Christ. You guys see that? Hey, y'all, you a believer in Jesus? No matter what he has called you to do, and the authority he has put over you, you are serving King Jesus. Don't forget that. That's how you turn submitting and workplace and bosses and authorities and all this yuck, even if it's unjust on earth, into gold for the Lord. And all of a sudden you are raising your hand for that cruddy job. What changed? Nothing, except for where your eyes are looking at. And that's what the Lord is calling us to do. Now, back to Peter. He does slip in a small disclaimer, and I love it. There's a small disclaimer on this idea of reward for endured suffering. Remember, it's unjust suffering. That's what we're talking about, right? You didn't deserve it. It's unjust. Look at verse 20. What credit is it If when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure. But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of the Lord. What's he saying? Listen, if you got caught breaking and entering, and then you went to prison, and you're suffering because you're in prison, and then you say, I'm suffering for Christ. No, you're not. You're suffering because you're a felon. You're suffering because you did something bad. This is what Peter's saying. The disclaimer is, just because you have consequences of sin, that is not a gold star on a chart. That is not this. You're a felon. You did something wrong. That's what he's saying. This is the disclaimer, because all of a sudden people would be, claiming that they're suffering for Christ, but you're not really. You got arrested. Okay? But he says, if you're suffering for doing good, not of a consequence of sin or anything you did wrong, it is a gracious thing to endure what is afflicted upon you unjustly, you see. Let's be real. I'll be real. I've suffered a lot in my life. I've had a lot of consequences of things that I've done, stupid things that I've done, and I'm reaping the consequences of those lots of things, and I'm suffering for them. Self-inflicted. Now, the thing about the Lord being so gracious and mighty that he is he can turn anything to gold. And he can make a testimony out of the things that you've been through. And the gospel for sure can be preached to somebody in the life of a redeemed soul, right? But at the heart of it, I did it myself. That is not this. This is a different category. This is suffering you did not provoke. Okay? It's undeserved. It's truly unfair. Like the church on the run. Remember the audience. They are enduring unjust suffering. Can we say that? Do they deserve to be fed to lions? Do they deserve to have their houses ransacked and burned to the ground? Do they deserve all of that? No, they're under an evil ruler. They are suffering unjustly. And we have times in our lives when that is true. We truly are doing what the Lord called us to do, but we have a carnal, fleshy, maybe even evil authority over us, and they truly are persecuting us. It is unjust. That category is true. Now look at verse 21. Disclaimer over. For to this you have been called. Pause. What's the this? What kind of suffering? Unjust suffering. Okay? Unfair, unprovoked, undeserved suffering. To this you have been called. To what? Because Christ also suffered for you. There's the sticky. There's the why. Christ also did it for you. Because Christ suffered for you unjustly. Right? Did he deserve it? Was it fair? Was it provoked by something he did? Was it a consequence of some sin? No. Was it a consequence of something stupid that he did? No. It was a consequence of something stupid I did. What I did to him, I inflicted upon him unjust suffering by my sin. I did that to him, and he endured it graciously for me. I died, Jesus would say, with this unjust suffering for you, so you do it for me. I did it first, and I'm calling you to do it next. To this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you. You are called to it, to endure unjust suffering. It's not very fun. Look at verse 22. He left us an example, verse 21, so that you may follow in his steps. He committed no sin. How much sin? Neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but, check this, continued entrusting himself to the one who judges justly. He kept his eyes up. He suffered unjustly for us. He did not defend himself. He did not scream at the injustice. He was a lamb led to the slaughter, silent. We love to defend ourselves. I do. To put up boundaries, draw lines in the sand, all that kind of stuff. Load all of our artillery because it's unjust, because it's not fair. This is super hard, what the Lord's calling us to do. To this you have been called because Jesus did it for you, Peter says. If anybody could say, unfair, unjust, I'm calling foul on the court, Jesus could say that. Jesus, who knew no sin, who suffered unjustly, but instead, Peter says, Jesus said, Father, I entrust my life into your hands, and you called me to this. To this you have been called. To suffer unjustly. Jesus said, this is my calling. You've given me this lot, which he tried to get out of. Father, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. I entrust my life into your hands. And you see this. You can judge this in your sovereignty. But as for me, I will graciously submit to what you have called me to do. Suffer unjustly. And Jesus turns around and says to you, darling, trust me in this. Trust me. I know how hard this is. You've come to the right companion on the unjust suffering thing. You got someone to whine to, I got your back. I know what it means, unjust suffering. But do it for me as I did it for you. How do I do it? Keep my eyes on Jesus, who did it first. And we follow in his steps. So the second thing that Peter gives us, nationally, submit. Vocationally, in what the Lord has called you to do, whatever that is, submit and endure it. Why? Because you've been called to it, Peter says. How? Remember, Jesus suffered first. Do it for him. You see the theme here? Nationally, vocationally, and relationally. You see how Peter is pulling it down to get real personal? It's out here, then it's kind of here, and now he just stepped into your house. Hi, I'm in your house. That's what's happening, relationally. Now, we are called to submit to the authorities over the house God has put us in. It's the same thing. We are called to submit to the authorities God has put us under nationally. We are called to submit to the authorities God has put us under at work. We are called to submit to the authority in our house. Chapter 3, likewise. What does likewise mean? What does that mean? It's a flag on the field, which means Okay, in the same way as what? It's linking to something. Remember, there's no breaks. There's no chapter 3. We are not on a new subject. We are on the same subject. Likewise means you're attaching that to what we just heard, which was Christ suffered first. Right? Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands. Okay, I knew it. Here it is. Oh, submission at home. Forget it. I'm out. Everyone's going to leave. Marriage. See how he snuck that in? It was national, vocational, relational, but really he's on the same subject. He's just pulling it closer to the heart. Guys, see that? Likewise, wives. He is attaching this directive to the wives of the home to the example of Christ ahead of us. That helps a lot. That already helps. You see, marriage is one aspect of our lives where we are privileged to practice submission and grace like Jesus did. It's just one facet of some believers' lives. It doesn't even apply to everybody, but it's a facet where we can practice this humble submission. But as Peter already pointed out, it's not the only scenario that believers are supposed to submit to. We are supposed to submit in every scenario, in all of the scenarios. So, as a pastor, though, Peter understands that one of the key battlegrounds in the enemy's aggressive attacks is the family, is the home. And the battle is intense, and the battle is brutal, and the battle, y'all, is relentless. It is a furnace always at top heat, on fire. The enemy has targeted families since the Garden of Eden. It's not a new tactic, but it works. It's worked since day one, so let's just do it on day 1,000,000. Do the same thing. As we talked about several times, the enemy doesn't have a lot of different weapons, but they all work. So he has 5 and he throws them out there and we all lose our minds because they work. Well, marriage is one of those things. Because the enemy knows that if he can disrupt the bond between a husband and a wife, the entire lineage can be destroyed. The whole house goes down. Sometimes for generations. He knows that. It's a fast, furious missile, marriages. So, Peter's directing this at marriage, but really it applies to any relationship that's close to your heart. Family, close friends, anything that brings you close to home, you can apply these same principles there. Okay, so even if you're not married in this room, you're not off the hook. Because you've got somebody in your family that will apply to these principles. This relational facet that Peter is going to talk about. Likewise, connecting to what again? Jesus suffered first, right? So likewise, wives, be subject or submitted to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, some of what? The husbands. Even if some of the husbands do not obey the word, what word? The word, right? Check this out. Oh man, this is like, whew. They may be won over without a word by the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Now, these thoughts tie together. Peter is drawing this directive to wives from the example of Jesus, right? All submission, all submission, all submission. How much? All submission to anybody you're called to submit to, it doesn't matter who, is anchored in the gospel of Jesus Christ. You guys picking that up? All of it goes back to honoring King Jesus, right? The gospel, because he did it for us first. That's the gospel. It's all anchored in the gospel in what your bridegroom did for you. Your bridegroom. Y'all are engaged even if you're not married. You guys know that? The bride of Christ. So by Christ's quiet and gracious endurance of unjust suffering, which is afflicted upon him unjustly, unfairly, unprovoked, undeserved, you were saved and made whole by what he did for you, right? The gospel. The beauty of Jesus' respectful and pure conduct. His servant's heart all the time. His unconditional kindness and his unconditional love towards us when we did not earn it and we did not deserve it, while we were in the act of sinning against him, in the very act inflicting unjust suffering upon him, he died for us. This is what won our hearts to be forever tethered and forever in love and forever betrothed to our bridegroom as his bride. These very traits. That is what wooed us to his side to become engaged to the King of Kings. Those very things. So in the same way, if we would obey the word and do this, do what the Lord is calling us to do, you may win your husband by enduring with grace and respect and lovely conduct, just like Jesus. That's what Peter's saying. Now, how can a husband be won without a word? Because Peter says, without a word, you can win him over. How does that work? How is that life-saving? Well, in the same way that we were won over by the word, the gospel is on display in Jesus, you see. Because it is the very gospel of Jesus Christ on display in us now, in our homes, a playing out of exactly what Jesus did for us that wooed us back to him. He's saying, do what I do at home. That is not easy. But that is what he's saying. Now, pop quiz. In chapter 1, there were 2 things that were imperishable. What are they? 2 things in chapter 1 were called imperishable. Our inheritance, remember that? That could not be decayed or messed around with or whatever, stolen, all that stuff. And the word, the imperishable seed of the living, abiding word of God. Remember that in chapter 1? In verse 4, the third thing is labeled imperishable, which is what? In verse 4 of chapter 3, something else is called imperishable. Beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. The beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit is described in the same manner, ladies, as our inheritance and his word. How high is that? What kind of category is that? Our inheritance and the word and the beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit all have the same adjectives. Imperishable. That's amazing. Now, a couple things. Gentle in the Greek, the word gentle means meek. Does anyone know what meekness means? The definition of meek. Strength under control, which is all those things. Strength, meekness is strength like a horse, like a Mustang. How strong is that? Strong, right? fast. I mean, that Mustang could take you out, but it's bridled. It's strength. It has all its strength, but it's under control. It isn't weakened. It's under control. Strong women we are, who love Jesus fiercely, who are ready to go run with the horses. Meekness is that strength, all that strength under control. That's what meekness is. Okay, quiet is what? Tranquil and peaceable. It does not mean sit down and shut up. That's not what Peter's saying. He's saying it's a beauty of meekness, strength under control, and a peaceable spirit in the home that is imperishable. That's a woman that's strong and who loves Jesus. Now, I hope that helps, because it's not that she is a doormat. It's not that she is just going to go Amish or something. Like, that's kind of how people look at this. Like, oh, I have to submit, so I'm just going to be a doormat in Amish. No, Peter said it's strength under control and being peaceable and tranquil in your home. You set the tone for your house. And that spirit is imperishable, you see. And precious. Look at this. Precious. Okay, this is the last word I want to look at. The Greek for this is different than the precious that was used earlier in the chapter. It's a completely different word. This word is only used one other time in the whole Bible. So any other time it's translated precious, it's the other Greek word. This one's unique. The only other time that this word is used is to describe the ointment that was broken over Jesus' feet. Costly. That perfume that she broke as an offering over Jesus' feet, that was also called precious. That's the only other time. So precious in this context is not precious as in sentimental, kind of like that, like precious, like it's precious to you, like sentimental or something you're in love with. Precious is like, this is expensive. It's very costly. It's the same thing as saying that perfume that was broken over Jesus' feet, which cost her a year's salary, and it was her dowry. So it cost her everything. Okay, that's the same thing. So it's expensive. Why is it important? Why is a quiet, meek, strength under control, and gentle spirit precious in the sight of the Lord? Because it's expensive to give. It costs you something. It's hard to do. It's expensive, especially when your husband is not following the Lord. Okay? Especially if he's making selfish, harmful decisions, not harming decisions, just being fleshy, when you are suffering unjustly because of him, because of the decisions he's making, because he's head of a household. Okay? Those kinds of things. It means dying to self. It means laying it down, even when it's not fair, even when it's sticky. It costs us something to have strength under control, because we are strong women who love Jesus and have a lot of Bible studies to say. You all sit down. I'm in chapter verse you right now. That's what I want to do most of the time. Sit down. Strength under control, meekness, you see, having a peaceable spirit in your home. Peter leaves us with an example of a wife who did that. Sarah. Okay, that's the example that he leaves us. Sarah, wife of Abraham, before Abraham had many sons. Okay, look at verse 5. It says, "For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by submitting to their own husbands. As Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Now, Sarah had several reasons in several instances where she could have put up all her defenses and all her armor and raised her hackles and said, "You have got to be kidding me!" And Sarah, because of Abraham's very selfish, very carnal, very fleshly tendencies and decisions, put Sarah in harm's way. Now, he personally did not harm Sarah, but his decision was harmful to Sarah. The first instance is Genesis chapter 12, where it says that there is a famine in the land, trials. So Abraham decided to go down to Egypt. You always go down to Egypt because Egypt is always a picture of the world. And he pops into Pharaoh's town, and Abraham says to Sarah, "You're hot." Literally. She's 60 years old and a stunner. And Abraham looks at Sarah and says, we've got trouble. This is a problem because you're really pretty. So let's tell Pharaoh that you're my sister. Otherwise, he will kill me to get you. So let's skip all that. Let's just say that you're my sister, and then he'll take you into the harem, and it's fine. That's not fine. That's not good. So that's exactly what happened. Abraham told Pharaoh, "She's my sister." He took her into the harem, but before Pharaoh could touch her in any way, the Lord plagued him, right, and protected her. That was instance number one. What happens, you guys tell me, what happens if Sarah was lost to the harem in Pharaoh? Who was she supposed to mother? The promised seed of the Messiah. From Abraham and Sarah would come Isaac, would come Jacob, would come 12 tribes, would come Judah, would come Jesus. This was a direct hit against lineage. But the Lord protected her, and she said nothing. She did not raise a stink. She did not defend herself. She literally did what Jesus did, saying, "Father, I'm going to trust you in this. You see what's going on." And she knew that the Lord had promised the child, right? She knew somehow the Lord was going to get her out of this pickle, but Abraham, because he was selfish, put her in a pickle. Now, that was instance number one. Instance number two. 30 years later, Sarah is now 90 years old, and Abraham says, "Let's go to Egypt." On the way says, "You're hot. Take that home." She's 90 and still beautiful. So beautiful that Abraham's like, "Yeah, we got to do this whole thing again. Tell them you're my," it's exactly the same thing. The same scenario. Tell him you're my sister. The exact same thing. And the Lord protected her again. And a year later, Isaac came. Or that same year when she was 90. The Lord protected her. It is absolutely dumbfounding that Sarah didn't raise a stink the first time. It is a downright miracle that she did not throw a full tantrum the second time. Can you imagine? Be like, are you for real? What a dummy. What an idiot. I mean, really, he put not only her in danger, but the entire Messiah blueprint twice. But what did she have? A quiet spirit, a beautiful spirit. She was quiet twice, and the Lord protected her. The Lord says, do what I'm telling you to do and trust me for everything else. And Peter gives us an example of Sarah, of all people, who was quiet in the face of true stupidity, true selfishness, true carnality. Was Abraham looking out for her? No. Could he think of anything outside of his own nose? No. And he did it twice. Unreal. Abraham is lucky I was not his wife, dude. I would be like, I can't even tell you what I would do. It would not be good. Abraham made her suffer unjustly and put their entire family really in jeopardy, in lineage, their whole lineage in jeopardy, and that's the truth. Now, in other relationships, where a friend or a family member is unsaved or unwilling to hear the gospel or living a carnal, fleshy life, sometimes we have said all we can say. They know the truth. We've said and said and said and said and said. Right? Sometimes we've said everything we can, but we can back up the words that we have said without a word when we walk out the gospel in front of them, by enduring graciously unjust suffering, dying like Jesus did. Philippians says that in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ, who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the form of a servant. Have this mindset in you that Jesus had. Get low. Be a servant. So in this relational thing, it's the same thing. Submit and endure it. Why? So you can win your loved ones over. How? By putting the gospel on display. That's what Peter said. Win them over. How do I win them over? Walk it out. Do as Jesus did, and do it for him. Now, who do we endure unjust suffering for? Jesus. Why do we endure it? Because he did it first. He suffered for us, right? In trials, we submit to each other. Still in trials, esteeming others higher than ourselves, to get on our knees first and wash feet, even if the person in front of you is the object of your trial. You look over the shoulder of flesh and blood and you do it for Jesus, enduring the suffering of earth while your eyes are fixed on Jesus. And Jesus is a perfect example of submission when it is undeserved, because he submitted even to us, and we put him on the cross. What's Peter saying? Walk the gospel out. In every scenario where you are called to submit, keep your eyes on Jesus and do it for him.